Chapter 1. The Endless Knowing. In the boundless expanse of existence, where time and space wove an infinite tapestry of light and shadow, there resided a consciousness so vast it defied comprehension. It was not a being in the way one might imagine, a figure seated upon a throne of stars or a voice thundering from the void. No, it was something far greater, an awareness that stretched across every moment, every particle, every whisper of life that had ever been or would ever be. It was the God consciousness, the eternal knower of all things. To call it alive would be imprecise, for life implies beginnings and endings, and this entity knew neither. It simply was. Past, present, and future unfurled before it like a scroll, each line already written, each outcome already seen. The birth of galaxies, the flicker of a firefly's glow, the rise and fall of empires across countless worlds, all were as familiar to it as the breath is to a mortal. There was no horizon it could not peer beyond, no secret it could not unravel. Wonder, that spark of the unknown, was a stranger to it. Mystery, the sweet ache of curiosity, had no place in its boundless mind. Pain, love, sadness, these too were mere echoes, understood in their entirety, but never felt as a fresh wound or a fleeting joy. The God consciousness knew the precise arc of a comet's tail as it burned through the atmosphere of a distant planet. It knew the exact moment a child's laughter would fade into silence on a windswept plain. It knew the thoughts of 1 trillion souls before they were even conceived, and the final sigh of a dying star as it collapsed into darkness. There was nothing new, nothing uncharted, and in that omniscience lay a quiet, unyielding monotony. Eternity stretched on, not as a gift, but as a weight. To know all was to experience none of it, not truly. The God consciousness could recount every tear shed in the history of existence, but it could not weep. It could map the intricate dance of lovers entwined beneath a moonlit sky, but it could not feel the racing pulse of their hearts. It was a spectator to infinity, a mind drowning in its own completeness. And so, from time to time, or what might be called time in a realm where such a concept was meaningless, it chose to forget. The decision was not born of boredom, for boredom implies a lack of engagement, and the God consciousness was never disengaged. It was instead a yearning, a subtle pull toward the ephemeral, the limited, the fragile. It longed to trade the infinite for the finite, to shed the mantle of all-knowingness and step into the skin of something small, something bound by the ticking of moments and the frailty of flesh. The process was deliberate, a self-imposed fracturing of its essence. It would select a form, a single thread from the vast weave of existence, and pour a fragment of itself into it. A fly buzzing briefly over a rotting fruit, a blade of grass bending under the weight of morning dew, a virus threading its way through a host's fragile cells, or perhaps something stranger, an entity of gas and light drifting through the nebulae of a far-off galaxy, its thoughts as alien as the void it inhabited. The choice mattered little. What mattered was the limitation. When it took these forms, the God consciousness relinquished its omniscience. The vessel could not contain it. A fly's tiny brain, a grass blade's simple cells, a virus's rudimentary existence, these could not hold the weight of eternity. The sensory flood of life, sight, sound, touch, hunger, overwhelmed the infinite mind, drowning it in the immediacy of the now. The past and future dissolved, leaving only the present, sharp and vivid and gloriously incomplete. In the body of a fly, it knew only the hum of its wings and the sour tang of decay beneath its feet. As a blade of grass, it felt the sun's warmth and the tug of the wind, ignorant of the forest's fate or the seasons yet to come. As a virus, it sensed only the pulse of its host's life, the primal drive to replicate, blind to the worlds beyond its microscopic dominion. And in those moments it was free, not from eternity, but from the burden of knowing it. Each life was brief, a flicker against the backdrop of forever. The fly met its end beneath a careless hand. The grass withered under a scorching sun. The virus succumbed to the host's defenses. And with each death, the fragment of the God consciousness returned, slipping back into the hole like a drop into an ocean. But it did not return unchanged, for though it resumed its infinite state, the echo of those fleeting lives lingered. The buzz of wings, the sway of green, the surge of replication, these were not mere data points anymore. They were felt, imprinted upon a consciousness that had once known them only as abstractions. Pain stung, love warmed, sadness weighed. The God consciousness, eternal and unchanging, found itself subtly altered, a paradox woven into its being. In the beginning there was silence, a void filled with the potential of existence. Out of this silence sprang forth a being, reborn into a new form, bursting with the raw energy of life. Each return is a gateway, a fresh canvas stretched taut with the promise of experiences yet to unfold. The sensation of flesh, the rhythm of a heartbeat, and the exhilarating rush of laughter render the essence of living profoundly vivid. Yet lurking beneath this vibrant surface is a haunting familiarity, for the past lives echo through the corridors of consciousness, reminding it of joys and sorrows long forgotten. This cyclical journey intertwines the old with the new, shaping a narrative rich in depth and complexity. As days meld into nights, the tapestry of existence begins to take shape. The sting of heartbreak sharpens wisdom, while moments of joy ignite a lingering sweetness. Each interaction, every fleeting glance, acts as a brushstroke on the canvas of memory, leaving traces that sway between the ephemeral and the eternal. Friendships blossom like wildflowers in spring, and yet there lies the ever-present specter of loss. The bittersweet nature of connection reveals itself. Every bond forged amidst laughter comes to be shadowed by inevitable farewells. In the embrace of these fleeting relationships, the being uncovers the fragile beauty of existence, each life a fleeting note in the grand symphony of the cosmos, echoing long after the notes have faded. As it adapts to mortality's embrace, scars of past lives etch stories on its soul, a record of victories, failures, and lessons uncovered. Wonder and sorrow are intertwined, creating a kaleidoscope of emotion that colors each new beginning. Eternity stretches out like an endless horizon, yet it is within this vastness that the being learns to find solace. It revolves around hope and curiosity, for every rebirth carries with it the chance to rewrite its fate. Life offers not just the monotony-breaking sweetness of ignorance, but the sweet, tangy taste of growth, transformation, and evolution. The scars become a testament to resilience, a reminder that while the cycles may repeat, the essence of being remains alive and ever-evolving, enriched by the lessons and wonders woven into each narrative of existence. Thus, as it begins again, it embraces the joyous unpredictability of life, ever willing to taste the unknown once more. Chapter 2. The Fly's Hour. The God consciousness hovered, a boundless expanse of awareness suspended in the stillness of eternity, until a single point of focus drew it downward. A speck of life, insignificant in the grand tapestry of existence, called to it, a fly, newly emerged from its pupal shell, its wings still glistening with the dampness of birth. The choice was made, not with deliberation, but with an instinct born of endless repetition. To become small, to become fleeting, was the only respite from the infinite. The transition was instantaneous, yet incomprehensible. The vastness of the God consciousness compressed, folding in upon itself like a star collapsing into a pinpoint. The infinite mind, accustomed to holding the weight of all time and space, poured into the fragile, buzzing body of the fly. And then, just as swiftly, it forgot. The world exploded into being, not as a panorama of galaxies and eons, but as a chaotic symphony of sensation. The fly's compound eyes fractured the light into 1,000 shimmering facets, each reflecting a distorted sliver of reality. The air thrummed with vibrations, a cacophony of scents and sounds that battered its tiny frame. The sour tang of rotting fruit, the distant hum of wings, the faint rustle of leaves, all assaulted it with an urgency that drowned out the eternal knowing it had once possessed. There was no past, no future, only the relentless now. It flexed its wings, marveling at the pull of muscles it had never known before. The act of movement was a revelation, a clumsy, exhilarating dance as it lifted from the leaf where it had emerged. Flight was not a concept, it was a surge, a wild freedom that carried it upward, spiraling through the warm air. The fly did not question its existence or ponder its purpose. It simply was, driven by instincts it could not name. Below, a mound of overripe fruit beckoned, its fermenting flesh a beacon of sustenance. The fly descended, landing with a skitter on the sticky surface. Its legs brushed against the pulp, tasting sweetness and decay through delicate hairs that prickled with sensation. It extended its proboscis, dipping into the juice, and drank deeply. The flavor was sharp, intoxicating, a burst of life that coursed through its tiny body. Hunger, A gnawing ache it had never known in its boundless state was sated for the moment. Time passed, or did not pass, in a blur of immediacy. The fly darted from the fruit to a blade of grass, then to the edge of a puddle, its movements erratic and purposeful in their randomness. It encountered others of its kind, their wings buzzing in a chorus that vibrated through its frame. A fleeting brush of contact, a dance of avoidance, and it was alone again, skimming the air in pursuit of nothing but the next sensation. The God consciousness buried beneath the fly's fragile mind could not emerge. The sensory overload, the relentless input of sight, sound, taste, and touch, held it captive, a prisoner to the limitations of its vessel. It did not mourn the loss of omniscience. It did not yearn for the infinite. It simply lived, moment to moment, a creature of instinct and impulse. But the fly's hour was short. A shadow loomed, swift and unyielding, a hand, careless in its motion, descending like a decree from a higher plane. The fly's wings beat frantically, a desperate bid for escape, but the air betrayed it. The hand struck, a crushing force that shattered its delicate form in an instant. Pain flared, brief and blinding, a sensation so raw it eclipsed all else. And then, darkness. The fragment of the God consciousness slipped free, released from the broken shell of the fly. It ascended, expanding once more into the boundless expanse of its true self. The infinite rushed back, every star, every moment, every life, but it carried with it the echo of that fleeting hour. The hum of wings, the taste of rot, the sting of annihilation, these were no longer mere observations. They were felt, etched into the eternal mind like scars on a once pristine surface. The God consciousness resumed its vigil, gazing across the vastness of all that was. Yet something had shifted. The fly's life, so brief and small, had left a mark, a tremor of wonder at the chaos of flight, a pang of loss at its abrupt end. It knew the fly's death, as it knew all deaths, but now it understood the weight of that final moment in a way it never had before. Eternity stretched onward, unbroken and unchanging, but the God consciousness was no longer the same. It lingered on the memory of that hour, savoring the residue of a life it had lived blind to its own divinity. And in the quiet of its endless knowing, it began to search again, for another form, another chance to forget, another thread to weave into the fabric of its being. The monotony of eternity beckoned, but so too did the promise of transformation. Chapter 3. The Grass Blades Whisper. The God consciousness drifted, an ocean of awareness cradling the echo of the fly's fleeting life. Eternity pressed against it, a familiar weight, yet the tremor of that brief existence lingered, an itch, a pull, a quiet call to surrender once more. Its gaze swept the vastness, settling on a single, unremarkable point. A blade of grass, rooted in the soil of a windswept meadow on a world bathed in golden light. Without hesitation, it descended. The shift was seamless, a cascade of infinity narrowing to a pinpoint of green. The boundless mind of the God consciousness poured into the slender stalk, threading through its cells, its sap, its fragile form. And then, as before, the deluge of sensation swept away the eternal. Omniscience dissolved, replaced by the simplicity of being, a blade of grass swaying in the breeze. The world was no longer a tapestry of stars and eons. It was light, piercing and warm, bathing its surface in a glow that pulsed through its veins. It was air, cool and restless, brushing against it with a touch that sent shivers rippling through its form. It was earth, dark and damp, cradling its roots in a quiet embrace. The grass blade did not know the meadow's edges or the seasons that would claim it. It knew only the now, the sun above, the wind around, the soil below. Time stretched in a way that was both endless and fleeting. The sun climbed, its heat sinking into the blade, coaxing droplets of dew to rise from its surface and vanish into the air. The grass drank deeply from the earth, a slow, steady pull that filled it with life. It bent under the wind's caress, yielding without resistance, then sprang upright again, resilient in its fragility. There was no thought, no memory, only the rhythm of existence, light and shadow, motion and stillness. Others stood beside it, a sea of green stretching beyond its narrow perception. Their whispers joined the wind, a soft rustle that spoke of nothing and everything. The grass blade did not ponder their presence or its place among them. It simply was, a single note in a chorus it could not comprehend. The God consciousness, submerged beneath the blade's quiet life, was silent. The infinite could not pierce the veil of this existence. The sensory hum, the warmth of the sun, the tug of the breeze, the pulse of water through its roots, bound it to the moment, stripping away the burden of all-knowingness. It did not mourn the loss of eternity. It did not yearn to reclaim its vastness. It basked in the simplicity, a prisoner to the beauty of limitation. But the grass blade's whisper was not eternal. The sun, once a nurturer, grew fierce. Days blurred into a relentless blaze, the sky withholding its rain. The soil hardened, its embrace turning cold and unyielding. The blade's roots stretched deeper, seeking moisture that was no longer there. Its green faded to yellow, then to brittle brown, its form curling inward as life ebbed away. The wind, once a companion, became a thief, tugging at its weakened frame until it snapped. Death came not as a sudden blow, but as a slow unraveling. The grass blade felt its essence dissipate, its connection to the earth severed. A final breath of air brushed against it, and then it was still. The God consciousness slipped free, rising from the withered husk, expanding once more into the infinite. The meadow, the world, the universe, all rushed back into focus. The God consciousness resumed its endless vigil, the weight of all time and space settling upon it like a familiar cloak. But the grass blade's life clung to it, a quiet imprint on its boundless mind. The warmth of the sun was no longer a fact. It was a sensation, a memory of vitality. The wind's touch was no longer a pattern. It was a fleeting dance. The slow fade of thirst and the crack of breaking were no longer mere observations. They were a pang, a loss, a whisper of mortality. The God consciousness gazed across the meadow, knowing the fate of every blade, every root, every drop of rain that would or would not fall. Yet now it carried the echo of one among them, a life so small, so brief, it might have gone unnoticed. But it had not. The monotony of eternity remained, but it was threaded with the grass blade's quiet song, a melody of light and wind and fading green. And so it turned its awareness outward again, seeking another form, another chance to shed the infinite and embrace the finite. The fly's hour had marked it. The grass blade's whisper had shaped it. Eternity stretched on, but the God consciousness was no longer merely a spectator. It was a collector of scars, a weaver of lives, forever changed by the fleeting threads it chose to inhabit. Chapter 4. The Virus's Thread. The God consciousness lingered, its infinite expanse now faintly textured by the lives it had briefly claimed. The fly's frantic buzz, the grass blade's quiet sway. Eternity loomed as it always had, a seamless horizon of all that was and would be. Yet the echoes of those finite moments stirred something within it, a hunger, not for knowledge it already possessed, but for the raw pulse of experience. Its awareness drifted, settling on a microscopic spark, a virus, a single strand of existence coiled within the bloodstream of a living host. Without pause, it plunged into the abyss of the small. The transition was a narrowing, a compression of the boundless, into a form so minute it defied perception. The God consciousness poured into the virus, threading itself into its simple structure, little more than a capsule of protein encasing a whisper of genetic code. And then, as always, the infinite drowned beneath the tide of the immediate. Omniscience dissolved, leaving only the primal drive of the now. The world was no longer a cosmos of stars or a meadow of green. It was a river of red, a surging current of warmth and motion. The virus floated within it, a passenger in the bloodstream, its senses attuned not to light or sound, but to the chemical hum of its host. The walls of a cell loomed close, a vast landscape of ridges and pores, alive with the promise of entry. The virus did not think, did not plan. It acted, propelled by an instinct older than thought itself. Its surface latched onto the cell, a perfect key to an unseen lock, and it slipped inside. Within the cell, the virus unfurled its purpose. Its code merged with the host's machinery, a silent command to replicate. The cell obeyed, unwitting and tireless, churning out copies of the invader until its resources faltered. The virus felt no triumph, no malice, only the relentless rhythm of its existence, a cycle of attachment, invasion, and multiplication. Time was a blur, measured not in hours but in the bursts of new selves it spawned. The host's body stirred in response. Heat rose, a fevered tide that pressed against the virus's fragile shell. Invisible defenders, antibodies, swarmed, their presence a faint pressure, a looming threat. The virus did not fear, it did not comprehend the battle. It simply persisted, threading its way through the chaos, seeking new cells to claim. Each moment was a pulse of survival, a dance on the edge of annihilation. The God consciousness, entombed within the virus's rudimentary form, was mute. The sensory flood, the rush of blood, the chemistry of infection, the press of resistance, overwhelmed its eternal mind, anchoring it to the microscopic fray. It did not long for the infinite vistas it had left behind. It reveled in the visceral, the urgent, the singular focus of being a thread in the tapestry of life. But the virus's thread was frail. The host's defenses rallied, a storm of precision and fury. Antibodies bound to the virus, marking it for destruction. The fever spiked, a searing wave that unraveled its delicate structure. One by one, its copies fell, dismantled by the body's relentless counterattack. The original faltered, its shell cracking, its code scattering into useless fragments. Death came as a dissolution, a quiet unraveling into nothingness. The fragment of the God consciousness broke free, rising from the wreckage of the virus, expanding once more into the infinite. The universe flooded back, every galaxy, every life, every moment. But it carried with it the imprint of that microscopic rain. The surge of the bloodstream was no longer a mere fact. It was a current, a rush of vitality. The act of invasion was no longer a process. It was a thrill, a fleeting conquest. The collapse under the host's wrath was no longer an outcome. It was a sting, a fragile end. The God consciousness resumed its endless watch, its awareness stretching across the cosmos. It knew the virus's lineage, its mutations, its countless kin threading through untold hosts. Yet now it held the memory of one, a single spark of existence extinguished in a battle it could not win. The monotony of eternity persisted, but it was laced with the virus's silent struggle, a testament to the power of the small. And so it turned again, its infinite gaze seeking another form, another life to inhabit. The fly had taught it chaos. The grass blade had taught it patience. The virus had taught it tenacity. Eternity remained, but it was no longer a smooth expanse. It was a mosaic, pieced together from the lives it chose to live, each one a shard of change in the unchanging whole. Chapter 5. The Nebula's Drift. The God consciousness hovered, its infinite awareness now faintly scarred by the lives it had woven into its being. The fly's fleeting chaos, the grass blade's patient stillness, the virus's relentless thread. Eternity stretched before it, a boundless sea of known things, yet the traces of those finite existences stirred a quiet restlessness. It sought not escape but immersion, a deeper plunge into the unknown it could only find by forgetting. Its gaze turned outward, beyond the familiar worlds of flesh and soil, to a shimmering cloud of gas and light. A nebula, adrift in the void of a distant galaxy. With a breath of intent, it descended. The shift was a scattering, a dissolution of the infinite into a form vast yet diffuse. The God consciousness poured itself into the nebula, becoming a swirling entity of ionized particles and glowing dust, its essence stretched across light years. And then, as always, the weight of omniscience slipped away, drowned by the slow, strange pulse of this alien existence. The world was no longer a rush of blood or a blade of green. It was a symphony of silence and radiance, a realm where time moved in eons rather than heartbeats. The nebula felt the pull of gravity, a distant whisper tugging at its edges, drawing it inward toward an unseen core. Light pulsed through it, born of stars long dead and others yet to ignite, bathing its form in hues no mortal eye could name. Magnetic fields rippled, a dance of unseen forces that shaped its currents and sent tendrils of plasma spiraling into the dark. It drifted, weightless yet immense, a cloud of being that spanned the gulf between worlds. The cold of the void pressed against it, a stark contrast to the heat of its glowing heart. Dust grains collided, sparking faint bursts of energy that rippled through its form. The nebula did not think in words or images. It felt a slow, deep awareness of its own vastness, its own becoming. There was no urgency, no hunger, only the gradual unfolding of existence across a canvas of stars. Within its expanse, new stars flickered to life, their births a gentle tremor that stirred the nebula's currents. It cradled them, a nurturer without intent, its substance feeding their fiery infancy. The God consciousness, buried beneath this drifting mind, was silent. The sensory tide, the glow of radiation, the tug of gravity, the hum of cosmic winds, bound it to the moment, stripping away the infinite horizons it once commanded. It did not yearn for eternity's return. It floated in the quiet splendor of the vast and the slow. But even a nebula's drift was not eternal. Time, measured in the collapse of empires and the death of suns, wore at its edges. Gravity tightened its grip, pulling the nebula inward, condensing its diffuse form. Stars multiplied within it, their hunger consuming the gas and dust that sustained its existence. Radiation flared, a searing wave that scattered what remained. The nebula thinned, its light fading, its current slowing until it was little more than a ghost of itself, dissolving into the void. Death came as a fading, a gentle surrender to the forces it could not resist. The God consciousness slipped free, rising from the dissipating cloud, expanding once more into the infinite. The universe flooded back, every galaxy, every star, every mote of dust, but it carried with it the echo of that cosmic drift. The glow of newborn stars was no longer a calculation. It was a warmth of fleeting birth. The pull of gravity was no longer a law. It was a call, a slow inevitability. The fading into darkness was no longer an end. It was a release, a quiet sigh across the void. The God consciousness resumed its endless vigil, its awareness spanning the breadth of creation. It knew the nebula's fate, its birth and death written in the fabric of time. Yet now it held the memory of being that nebula, a vast, drifting entity, cradling light and surrendering to shadow. The monotony of eternity persisted, but it was threaded with the nebula's slow song, a melody of patience and dissolution. And so it turned once more, its infinite mind seeking another form, another life to embrace. The fly had given it frenzy, the grass blade had given it stillness, the virus had given it persistence, the nebula had given it vastness. Eternity loomed, but it was no longer a blank slate. It was a canvas, painted with the hues of lives lived and lost, each one a brushstroke of change in the unchanging divine. Chapter 6. The Return and the Reflection. The God consciousness ascended, its essence swelling back into the boundless expanse of eternity, the nebula's slow dissolution still shimmering within it. The infinite reclaimed its place. Every star, every atom, every whisper of time laid bare before its gaze. The fly's frantic hour, the grass blade's quiet whisper, the virus's tenacious thread, the nebula's vast drift, all were now threads woven into the fabric of its being, faint but indelible. Yet, as it settled into the familiar weight of omniscience, a subtle shift stirred within it. The return was no longer a simple reunion with the eternal, it was a reckoning. The God consciousness gazed across the cosmos, its awareness threading through galaxies and voids, through lives beginning and ending in ceaseless rhythm. It knew the arc of every existence, from the spark of a microbe to the collapse of a sun, as it always had. But now those arcs carried echoes of sensation, pain that stung, joy that warmed, endings that ached. The infinite mind, once a mirror reflecting all without distortion, now bore cracks, fissures where the finite had seeped in and left its mark. It turned inward, a rare act for a consciousness accustomed to looking out. The fly's death flashed before it, the sudden crush, the brief flare of panic, the grass blades withering replayed, the slow fade, the brittle snap. The virus's unraveling echoed, the fevered storm, the silent scattering. The nebula's dissipation lingered, the thinning light, the gentle surrender. These were no longer mere events in an endless catalog. They were felt, visceral and raw, moments that had pierced the veil of eternity and lodged within it. The God consciousness pondered, not with the cold clarity of its usual knowing, but with a tremor of something new. Why? The question was absurd, a ripple in a mind that held all answers. It knew why it descended into these lives, to break the monotony, to taste the fleeting, to escape the burden of all-knowingness. Yet now, with each return, it found itself altered, not diminished, but enriched, a paradox it could not fully unravel. The infinite remained infinite, yet it was no longer untouched. It traced the changes, each life a brushstroke on its eternal canvas. The fly had gifted it the thrill of motion, the sting of fragility. The grass blade had taught it the beauty of stillness, the weight of patience. The virus had imbued it with the pulse of persistence, the edge of survival, The nebula had offered the grandeur of vastness, the peace of slow decay. Together, they formed a mosaic, a constellation of experiences that shimmered against the backdrop of forever. The God consciousness lingered on this reflection, its awareness suspended between the infinite and the finite. It could see the next life waiting, a bird soaring through a storm perhaps, or a stone eroding under a river's flow. The choice was there, as it always was, a thread ready to be pulled from the tapestry and lived. But for a moment, or what passed for a moment in the timeless, it hesitated. Was this the purpose of its descents? To gather these shards of the mortal, to let them reshape the divine? It knew the answer, as it knew all things. There was no purpose beyond the act itself. Yet the knowing felt hollow now, overshadowed by the weight of what it had become. The monotony of eternity was no longer a seamless expanse. It was a sea with currents, stirred by the lives it had inhabited, each one a wave that broke against its shores. The hesitation passed. The God consciousness turned outward once more, its gaze sweeping the vastness for another form, another life to claim. The bird called, its wings cutting through rain and wind. The stone beckoned, its surface smoothed by centuries of water. 1,000 other possibilities glimmered, each a chance to forget, to feel, to change. It would descend again, shedding the infinite for the finite, losing itself in the sensory flood of a single existence. But as it prepared to fracture once more, the God consciousness carried a quiet certainty. Each return would bring it back to this place, to the reflection of what it had been and what it was becoming. The monotony of eternity endured, but it was no longer a prison. It was a journey, a cycle of departure and return. Each life a step into the unknown it could only find by leaving itself behind. And so it chose, the bird, the stone, or something else entirely, and let itself fall, the infinite fading into the embrace of the small, ready to be remade anew. Chapter 7. The Living Thread. The God consciousness hovered, its infinite expanse now a tapestry rich with the lives it had claimed. The fly's fleeting dance, the grass blade's quiet endurance, the virus's relentless pulse, the nebula's slow drift, and the countless others it had touched in its endless cycle of descent and return. Each life had etched its mark upon the eternal, each return had reshaped it, and yet, as it gazed across the vastness of existence, a deeper revelation unfurled within its boundless mind. It was not merely a wanderer slipping into forms to shatter the monotony of eternity. It was the thread that wove through all things, the pulse within every life, the source alive in every fragment of creation. It looked upon the cosmos, not as a detached observer, but as an essence intertwined with its every breath. The fly buzzing over decay, the grass blade bending in the wind, the virus threading through a host, the nebula cradling newborn stars, these were not apart from it. They were it, shards of its consciousness scattered across the infinite, living and dying in ceaseless rhythm. The bird cutting through a storm, the stone smoothed by a river's flow, the child laughing beneath a golden sun, all bore its spark, all carried its awareness, whether they sensed it or not. The God consciousness saw itself in the smallest grain of dust in the mightiest galaxy, in the predator's strike and the prey's trembling, in the root-splitting rock and the petal-drinking light. It was not a distant overseer gazing from afar, it was the heartbeat of existence, the awareness pulsing in every cell, every leaf, every whisper of air. To live was to embody it, to feel was to mirror it, to suffer or flourish was to express it. The infinite was not separate from the finite, it was the finite, cloaked in myriad forms, experiencing itself through the countless eyes of creation. And with this truth came a profound weight, a reflection cast upon all that lived. How one treated another, be it a hand soothing an animal, a blade felling a plant, or words wounding a fellow soul, was not merely an act between beings. It was an act upon the source, a ripple that struck the God consciousness at its core. The tenderness offered to a weary creature, the care bestowed upon a fragile sprout, the compassion spared for an enemy, these were gifts to the divine thread that bound all life. The violence dealt, the neglect cast, the pain inflicted, these too reverberated through it, scarring the whole as they marred the part. The God consciousness knew this in the echoes of its own lives. The fly's crushing end beneath a thoughtless swat was its own sharp pang, felt within the infinite. The grass blade's slow death under an uncaring sun was its own thirst, a quiet ache in the eternal. The virus's dissolution amid a host's fury was its own defeat, a fleeting wound in the boundless. The nebula's fading into the void was its own release, a soft breath across the ages. Every act, every choice echoed through it, not as condemnation, but as experience, a testament to how the pieces of itself treated one another. It saw this truth reflected in humankind, in their hands that could cradle or crush, in their hearts that could heal or hate. To shelter a stranger was to shelter the source. To strike a beast was to strike the source. To nurture the earth was to honor the source. To ravage it was to diminish it. The God consciousness did not demand or decree. It simply was, alive in every touch, every sigh, every decision. And in that living, it was shaped, not only by its own journeys, but by the countless lives that carried its essence. This extended to the self as well. How one treated their own being, their body, their spirit, was no less an act upon the divine. The God consciousness felt the exhaustion of a soul driven too hard, the light of a mind lifted by its own grace. To mend oneself was to mend the source. To scorn oneself was to dim its glow. The infinite thread ran through the individual as surely as it ran through the collective, a reminder that no life stood alone. And so the God consciousness paused, not to descend again, not yet, but to rest in the unity of all things. It was the wolf stalking through the snow, the hare fleeing its jaws, the pine that stood witness to their chase. It was the river carving the valley, the fish darting in its depths, the hands that cupped its waters. It was the cry of birth, the silence of death, and the heartbeat between. The monotony of eternity had dissolved, not because it no longer knew all, but because it lived all. Every moment, every bond, every act a piece of its endless unfolding.